Have you heard about the numerical miracles in the Qur'an? Let's take a look.
So chapter 32 is called Sajda, prostration. There are 30 verses. So the prostration verse is verse 15. And lo and behold, it has exactly 15 words.
Interesting, sure. But when you've got over 6,000 verses to work with, you're bound to stumble on a few fun coincidences. Any large text, religious or not, will eventually cough up patterns if you look hard enough. And why are we fixated on the word count? Who decided that was God's favorite metric? Why not the number of letters? Or the number of spaces? Or the number of sentences? Or whether the number 15 actually appears in the verse? Or the numbers 1 and 5? Heck, who says it has to be 15? It could just as easily be 6. The number of letters in the word prostration. Or 32, the chapter number. Or the number of times the letter S appears. It's called pattern recognition bias. Our brains love connecting dots, even when those dots are random and don't actually mean anything. Out of all the things you could count, it's easy to pick the one that happens to match.
And not to mention the word prostration is the 186th word in this chapter. And if we add 1, 8 and 6 together, what do we get? 15, which is the verse number of prostration.
I see what you did, but let's break down what you didn't do, which is essential for any legitimate investigation. First, you didn't set the rules before you saw the target. You start with the number 186. Then you go fishing for a way to connect it to 15. You tried adding the digits together, and it magically worked. You could just as easily manipulate the number 186 in dozens of ways to try and force a pattern. Multiply the digits? Nope. Subtract them? Not helpful. Try ratios. No divine signal there either. Apply modular arithmetic, mod 7, mod 19, mod the chapter number. Nothing consistent. Double it? Wait, that's the total number of words in the chapter. Another miracle? Square it? Does that mean something now? Find its prime factors? Anything special about those? Digit concatenation? Still nothing. Sum of squares? Coincidence again. Use gematria or abjad values for prostration. Treat it as a timestamp, a GPS coordinate, or a page number. Same story. You can also reverse it. Then take those new digits, 6, 8, and 1, and run the entire list of operations all over again. At some point, one of these forced operations will line up with something. Not because it was designed that way, but because numbers and letters are like road networks or electrical grids. Every number connects to another, and so on infinitely. By trying countless invisible mathematical paths, you are guaranteed to eventually find a road that leads to a destination you like. Second, you connected the word's position to its verse number, but you could have connected it to the chapter number itself, the total number of verses in the chapter, the number of words in the chapter, the number of chapters, the number of times prostration appears in the entire Qur'an, the number of prostration verses in the whole Qur'an, the page number this verse appears on, the atomic number of an element mentioned metaphorically in the verse. In conclusion, this is not truth-seeking, it is pattern-seeking. It's our brains playing connect the dots, and when you're allowed to ignore all the dots that don't connect, you can make any picture you want.
Let's take the prostration verse, multiply it by 2, we get 30, which is the total amount of verses in this chapter.
Wait, did he just, out of nowhere, multiply by a completely random number? I've seen people stretch logic before, but I honestly didn't expect this level of creativity. It's so beautifully, brazenly arbitrary, I'm almost impressed. I couldn't have come up with a better example of cherry picking if I tried. Why not by 2.5 or 3, or by the square root of pi? This is what happens when there are no fixed rules. You can make anything look meaningful.
Let's also take 186, which is the position that the word prostration comes in this chapter. We multiply that by 2, we get 372, which is the total words in this chapter.
We're doing this again? Think about the sheer number of choices you had. First, you picked your source number. You used 186, the word's position in the chapter. But why? Why not its position in the entire Quran? Why not its position in the first division? That's at least 3 different source numbers right there. Second, you picked your magic operation. You used multiply by 2. But why? Why not multiply by the verse number 15? Why not multiply by the chapter number 32? That's 3 different operations from multiplication alone. Just with these few choices, you already have 3 source numbers and 3 operations. That's 27 possible results. You only needed one of them to be a number that appears somewhere, anywhere, in the chapter for you to declare a miracle. And you found one. Now imagine if we added subtraction, division, digit sums. The number of possible combinations explodes into the hundreds, if not thousands. When you have thousands of possible combinations, finding one random match isn't a miracle. It's a statistical inevitability.
Coincidence? Not convinced?
He would say things like that and people would say, is he serious? It seemed really wild and crazy, but it was hard to make sense of what made sense in unicorn land.
Well, let's look at chapter 71, which is the chapter of Noah. The total amount of verses are 28. So let's minus the verses from the chapter, yes?
Okay, so our friend looks at chapter 71 with its 28 verses, and from the infinite menu of mathematical operations available, he chooses subtraction, and we get 43. So, what profound truth does this number 43 hold? Let's see. Was Noah 43 years old when he built the ark? Did it rain for 43 days and 43 nights? Did he bring 43 species onto the ark? Nothing seems to fit. Which is extra awkward because the Qur'an actually tells us Noah lived for 1,000 years less 50. Maybe it's the number of letters in the first verse? The number of times Noah is said in this chapter? Nope, it's less. The number of sentences? The number of words starting with N? Okay, number 43. It's your time to shine. The whole miracle hinges on you. So, show yourself.
71 minus 28 is 43. So 43 is the amount of times Noah is mentioned in the Qur'an.
Of course. Why didn't I think of that? The number 43, which we got from a random subtraction of 2 numbers in chapter 71, is miraculously connected to a database statistic from the entire rest of the Qur'an.
There are 43 chapters after this chapter that do not mention Noah, and there are 43 chapters that come before that do not mention Noah either.
Fascinating. So we have a perfect symmetry, 43 chapters before and 43 chapters after. Chapter 71 that don't mention Noah. How mathematically satisfying and completely unconvincing. Here's a simple test. Let's do this for the other prophets in the Qur'an. Try it with Abraham or Jonah or Joseph. Does the same magical math work? Do their chapter numbers minus their verse counts equal how many times they're mentioned? Do they have perfectly balanced numbers of chapters before and after that don't mention them? Of course not, because if it didn't work for Noah, we'd just change the rules. That's the problem. There's no predefined rule. There's no test that works consistently across the board. It's just throwing mathematical spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. If this were real science, you'd define your formula first. For any prophet, their chapter number minus their verse count will equal their total mentions. Then you'd test it. And you'd fail. Miserably.
How many do mention Noah? Well, it's 28, the number of verses in this chapter.
Well, at this point, color me statistically unconvinced.
Wait, there's more. Let's multiply the chapter by the verse. That's 71 by 28. We get 1,988. And the 1,988th verse in the Quran has how many letters? Yes, that's right, 43.
Okay, I'm actually done listening to this, so I'm skipping to the end.
Now, what makes this more profound is the fact that the Quran was revealed circumstantially. In other words, when the Prophet was asked something or when something happened, that's when the verses would be revealed. So there was no way of the Prophet ﷺ predicting or preempting those questions.
But that's only looking at one side of the story. An alternative theory, supported by many historians, is that Muhammad wasn't the one who single-handedly compiled the final Quran. It was a project undertaken after his death by a team of scribes, poets, and scholars working under the caliphs. Look, I'll grant you that some of these numerical parallels seem precise. For example, the words "this world" and "the hereafter" are both mentioned 115 times. That is a neat parallel. But the real question you need to answer is this. What you really need to prove is that no book, compiled by a team, can possibly create these numerical harmonies? Can a group of intelligent human beings with a unified goal carefully edit and arrange a text to create symbolic numerical patterns? Of course they can. It's called editing.
And secondly, the Prophet, peace be upon him, could not read or write. So he didn't sit there writing and then counting the words and then mirroring it. So it would have been impossible for the Prophet to mastermind this literary miracle.
Whether or not Muhammad could read and write, or had friends who can, is irrelevant here. What matters is the process of compilation. The people who standardized the Qur'an into its final form are the ones who had the opportunity to create numerical harmonies. You're presenting a false choice. Either it was an illiterate man acting alone, or it was God. You're completely ignoring the very plausible, human-driven process that happened after the initial revelation, which is exactly when such intricate, cross-referential patterns could have been intentionally woven into the final standardized text.
And the cherry on the cake, the Qur'an was not revealed in chapter and verse order. So at the end of the Prophet's life, that's when all the written parts of the Qur'an were collected and collated. It was not done initially.
And what a convenient cherry it is, because this entire argument that the chaotic, non-chronological revelation makes the numerical patterns more miraculous rests on a single, unverified premise. We have to take the entire Islamic narrative of compilation entirely at face value. So your cherry on the cake doesn't prove a miracle. It just proves that your entire argument is built on a foundation of, well, faith, not verifiable history.
So is there any wonder why so many people, Muslims and non-Muslims, are impressed by this book?
I guess for the same reason so many people are impressed by the Bible code, or astrology, or a really convincing magic trick. People are easily impressed by patterns and mysteries. It doesn't make it true, it just makes it popular. Being impressed isn't proof. I'm impressed by the CGI in a Marvel movie. That doesn't mean Thor is real.
The religion is the fastest growing on the planet.
That growth is overwhelmingly from high birth rates in Muslim-majority countries. It's demographics, not divine digits. People aren't converting in droves because the word prostration is the 186th word in a chapter. They're being born into it. Let's not confuse a baby boom with a truth bomb.
And why you, if you are Muslim, should be reading it and benefiting from it more. And if you're a non-Muslim, you read it and you accept Islam.
Yeah, I think I'll pass. But hey, thanks for watching.